Much. So hi everyone, thanks for joining us for our brown bag workshop. Really pleased to be talking to someone who I respect a great deal, Sunny Verma, CEO and founder of TutorBright. TutorBright is Canada's largest in-home tutoring service and has been in operation for about 12 years, I think, and correct me, Sunny, if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's about it.
Sunny has a really unique perspective on the business and yeah, unfortunately is not in competition with a lot of us down here in the States. So the perspective is always welcome and excellent. And he has a lot of really sort of interesting insights on the direction that tutoring is taking now in the wake of COVID, and also, you know, just how the services that we as test prep professionals provide can evolve or may evolve over time. And we really appreciate you joining us, Sunny. And I'm going to give you control here.
Great.
And let you just take it away. So.
All right, awesome. Can you guys all see and hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I gained some head nod. That's awesome. Well, sorry, Kevin, I'm going to have to let some people, can you let them in, Kevin, while we're doing this? Okay, we both can?
I'm going to let
okay,
them in.
Great.
And
great, excellent. So I'm excited to be here again. Kevin and I did a little one of these back in, I think it was late July. So I think there's great opportunity to continue the discussion. I don't know if you guys were in that session. There's going to be some repetition based on some of the things we discussed, but the difference today is that my objective is to make it a lot more shareable. I really want us all to sort of contribute into the discussion. So one of the best benefits of having us all here and having us all in the same industry is that there's a significant amount of sharing that can happen. Now, one of the major talking points that I think we are all curious about and somewhat concerned about maybe is, how is COVID really going to affect our business? How has it affected our business? So a couple things I want to do today is, one is, first and foremost, to provide some hope here. Our industry got flipped upside down, but I think there's a lot of beautiful gems that to occur. And I think there's a lot of really interesting new narratives in tutoring that's starting to come to play that is going to be hyper beneficial for our business. So one of the things is, as Kevin mentioned, I live in Canada. The majority of my operations is in Canada. We do a little bit in the US, some in Australia as well. We're all competition to some degree here. The one thing that I feel about our industry, in all honesty, is that we're all at the buffet of tutoring, put it that way. There is enough food for all of us to eat. So I highly encourage sharing amongst amongst every single one of us. Now, the reason why I say that as well is because, in all honesty, this industry is completely privately held. There's very limited knowledge out there of how to like have the best case practices. And the truth is, most of us got into the industry because we had a passion of making a difference in the world. Now, if we actually anchor to that passion, that helps make the decision of sharing really, really easy. Because if I can help you do better for your students, that's a good thing. And if you can help me do better for my students, that's a great thing as well. Last time when we did this, we had a lot of fun. We just ran out of time. So we had very limited time for any question and answer. I don't think we actually even came to that. So today, I want to format a little bit differently. I want us to be able to share. I think it's going to be really important to hear some of the narratives around COVID and the impact that it had on our businesses. And I also want to talk about scale. And this is if you guys want to talk about it. So I know some of us are been in the tutoring business for a little bit and are thinking about, hey, what are the next steps? Do I franchise my business? Do I raise capital? Do I do a greenfield strategy? I have somewhat experience in all of these, and perhaps there's other people on here as well. And from a selfish standpoint, the reason why I want you guys to share is I want to learn as well. There's so much good knowledge that I think we could collectively all contribute, and it makes a world of difference. And primarily because when I was thinking about this, one of the challenges with COVID and tutoring is that there was this, and Scott, I heard you mention this a little bit earlier when we were all logging on, but there was this notion that tutoring was booming. It was booming back in March. It was booming in April. I don't know any tutoring company that was booming at that time. I mentor a lot of other smaller tutoring companies. And it was interesting because there was a lot of my friends thought, you know, in their words, I was killing it. I wasn't killing it. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. And it would have been really nice to have more tutoring companies be honest about that, in the sense of thinking like, hey, is there something wrong with me, something wrong with my business, some market opportunity that I'm not necessarily looking at? And having that sort of all, like I said, like all of us contributing to what's actually happening to the narrative of tutoring and where we can actually take it. Now, today, I'm going to give you guys a brief summary of who I am and why I started Tutor Bright. And in this, I just want to provide a little bit of context. I also want to talk about the pre-COVID industry very, very briefly. And then where we're going to have a lot of our discussions are on how COVID affected our business and some of the new opportunities and new, I think the new narrative of tutoring and how we can construct it together. And two major points I think are going to be the future of supplemental education. So I started this company called Tutor Bright. We've been around for about 12 years now. I feel like I age myself when I say that, because I never thought, to be honest, when I was much younger, I actually did not really admired the school system, to say it nicely. So I never thought I was going to be in education. Today, I don't think I could ever be happier, and I always want to play some sort of role in education. The reason why I started was really interesting. So about maybe 12, 13 years ago, I was working as a management consultant. And let me tell you something, management consultant, very fancy title, in my opinion, very crappy job. I'm going to apologize if anybody is daylighting as a management consultant. It was just my brief experiences in it. When I was working, I didn't just dislike my job. I genuinely always say I detested my job. And the primary reason for that is that I felt like I was doing no value to this world. Every Sunday night, I had that dread in my stomach. I wake up every Monday morning thinking I had just a week to get through. And irrespective of the income that I was earning, it just felt life was so dull. Now, around that time, I got a call from my friend, and she told me about a younger sister who was failing grade 12 English. Because she was failing grade 12 English, she became the black sheep of her family. Her parents pretty much wrote her off. She had so many tutors in her life. Nothing seemed to be working. They took her to counseling. And they were kind of at their very wit's end with her. And they said, Sonny, listen, you have a little bit of spunk. Maybe you can motivate her, inspire her. Can you just try tutoring her? And I decided to take this on, not because I've had any experience in tutoring, just because I genuinely never felt any purpose in my work. And because I was going to do this pro bono, I thought, hey, maybe I can contribute back something positive to this world. So I decided to meet with her. And we decided to meet at this really grand library. So let me set the scene for you. So I remember walking into this library. My heart starts beating fast and faster as I start to approach her, because I've never tutored before. I'm thinking, what did I just get myself into? I go up to her and I introduce myself. I say, hey, I'm Sunny. Nice to meet you. She shakes my hand. She's like, nice to meet you too. And I'll never forget what she says to me. She says, I got to be honest with you. I don't know what you're doing here. I respond and I say, well, I'm supposed to be your tutor. She responds, she's like, yeah, I appreciate that, but that really never works. Now my heart starts to beat a little bit faster. I'm getting more and more uncomfortable. And I say, okay, listen. You're in grade 12, you must have like an essay to write. You probably have some homework. There's probably something that we could work on together. She agrees at the time. Then she actually then looks at me. She's like, listen, I'm just going to be honest with you. Like I said, I don't know what you're doing here. I may have some homework, but I'm not a good writer. I can't even write. So let's just call it quits. I paused for like a moment. It felt like forever, because I had no idea what I was going to do. This girl's in grade 12. She can't even write. What am I supposed to do? There was a pen in my pocket. I pull it out and I hand it to her. I open up my backpack, pull out a pad of paper, and I give it to her. And I say, can you write? You can't write? She looked at me confused, picks up the pen, begins to write the statement out. As soon as she's done, I rip the pad of paper out of her hand. I hold it up. I'm like, you obviously can write, because you just wrote. I can't write. And she laughed. And I said, listen, all jokes aside here, there's a real sad underlying story. You've been taught it's better to never try than to try and fail. You taught that if you just coast through life, you're going to succeed. But guess what? If you don't try, you fail by default. And every single great human achievement that anybody has ever admired, you know what it started with? It started with a single act of trying. Where would your life be if you just tried? I said, like, listen, you're throwing away your life right now because you are too scared to pick up the pencil and put it to paper to show yourself what you may actually be capable of. And I saw a light bulb go off in her head. She got a little bit emotional. She walked around. She gave me a hug. She's like, listen, you're right. Let's get this started. And we started going to work. And within about 2 months, I mean, her grades started to skyrocket. And it was really interesting because we did work on English, but we also worked on her limiting beliefs and helping remove them. And I used academics as a vehicle to do so. It wasn't just her English grade that started going up. Her math started going up, even though we weren't working on it. Pretty much every single subject that she was working through started to skyrocket. And I remember feeling really, really good about this. After one session, it was like later on near the end of the term that we're working together, she looked at me and she said, listen, I have a question for you. I was like, sure, go ahead. She said, listen, you've encouraged me to try. You complain about your job and how much you love this and how you always want to do something like this for the rest of your life. How come you aren't trying for your dreams? I awkwardly shrugged it off and said, ha ha, and pretty much like ended the session. And I remember driving home that night and thinking, wow, she's absolutely right. And every single time I thought about starting a tutoring company, I felt like I was hitting wall after wall after wall because, in all honesty, I had bills to pay, I had student debts I owed. I was kind of just starting out in my career. Also, I was thinking, like, what would everybody else say? Like, you know, I'm quitting my job to tutor. This doesn't really make a lot of sense. And then it just clicked. Like, genuinely, the only time I've ever hit a wall was when I went running outside. I looked down at my phone and actually ran into a wall. So I'm doing the exact same thing as her. I'm making up excuses for outcomes that I want, yet I'm not willing to put forward. I'm not willing to put myself forward. I'm not willing to put the pen and the paper myself, but where would my life be if I did? And after a little bit more contemplation, I quit my job and I started Tutor Bright. And the way we got our first clients, well, probably the first 10 to 20 clients, was literally just knocking on doors. At the time when I started, there was no such thing as Google. Facebook didn't have an advertising platform. Well, there was Google, but you didn't advertise on it. I couldn't afford Yellow Pages. So the only way I could get clients was literally knocking on doors or standing outside Walmart or Staples and soliciting parents as they're walking in for the first about 4 or 5 months of getting the business off the ground. And lo and behold, that's literally how we grew. Now, fast forward several years, we I think we're in about 50, 60 plus cities now, considered to be one of the largest in-home tutoring companies in the world. And I like to think the reason why we grew is because we did an awesome job. But the reality is that's not necessarily the case. I can't take credit for that because simultaneously of doing a good job, which I'm sure we all feel like we do, the industry was booming. I remember looking at this industry, and this came out in 2012 in Forbes, where it said the global private marketing and tutoring is going to surpass $102 billion by 2018. I remember thinking, like, my naive entrepreneur self was thinking, if I just get 1% of that market, I'm going to be great for the rest of my life. I realized, like, wow, there's a massive growing trend. And more recently, I think this came out, it might have been it came out in 2018, I believe. But it said the global private marketing tutoring is going to be $177 billion, or 621 million by 2026. So it's almost doubling from the last statistics. And in the micro, genuinely, my business was growing year after year. Like, we started scaling hyper. We tried pretty much everything under the sun to scale, which is why I mentioned earlier, if you guys want to talk about scale, I'd be more than happy to do so. But there was other things that were pointing to this as well. 50% of parents that were surveyed, and I think there was over 3,000 in this specific survey in a larger province, said that if they could afford a tutor, they'd get a tutor. And that was back in 2011. And that has increased since that point. Now, the things that we've also seen in the industry, it wasn't just, so I'm going to assume that some of us are just doing test prep, so ACT, SAT, and maybe other standardized tests. There is, in addition to that, we have in-home tutoring, which is sort of more of an emerging growing market in the early 2000s. You have learning centers, which I'm assuming some of us are in as well. And that used to be the base of tutoring, but in the last 5 years, a lot of things have changed. I mean, we've seen a rise of ESL tutoring in Asia. AI and text tutoring is definitely on the rise. Membership models in tutoring, Kevin and I were actually speaking about this yesterday and getting in he was asking my opinion on sort of what's happening with sort of subscription membership based tutoring. And then we also saw bill by the minute tutoring. So you started seeing all these subset of tutoring markets starting to rise and things starting to really emerge. And in all honesty, I feel like most people that were in tutoring, especially the people that I was coaching at the time, we were all rising collectively together, sharing information. So it was really exciting. Now, unfortunately, as we all know, last March, COVID happened, and that kind of flipped the world upside down. And that's not just from the perspective of education, that's also the perspective of health, economics, and a multitude of other things that we have to take in consideration in our life. But education was a big failure. I mean, when coming to the end of March, this is what online schooling looked like. I laugh every time I see this picture, is because, you know, when you consider online education, which the world pretty much jumped into, most people had no idea what they were getting themselves into. When we think about authorities in education, so teachers, superintendents, executives in education, had no idea how to make this pivot very, very quickly, because we honestly never had to in the past. In addition to this, it was probably in June when this came out, but the Wall Street Journal put up this big front page thing saying the results are in for remote learning. It didn't work. And that's really because parents had no idea how to help their kids. When we looked at remote learning, kids also had to take a lot of control over their own education. So things like executive functioning and be able to regulate their own homework wasn't a skill set that most kids had to develop, because you had your teacher that did this for you. But a lot of things have changed since then. So how did this impact me specifically, and how did I think it impact the industry? Well, in April, which is interesting. So if depending on what side of, if you're on the East Coast or West Coast or what state you're from, typically your best months of tutoring are going to be February, March, April, May, perhaps June too, depending on where you live. And it's because we go through a ramp up season, right? We have an influx typically happening right now. So August, September, October, November, you'll see a little bit of die down. December is still a decent revenue generation month across the industry. January, you start to see a nice pickup again. February, you make some good money, et cetera. And for the following spring months, you do. Now, April is typically my best month, so is May. In April, I lost 65% of my revenue overnight. And it felt like, okay, well, what's going on? And this is for a few reasons. One, school year was coming to an end. Everything went online, as I mentioned, unsuccessfully. There was so much leniency given to students where a lot of states and provinces said, listen, we're not failing any student right now. So kids really didn't have to show up to their school. The economy is tanking, so that came for economic uncertainty for families. And let's be serious, education wasn't number one, it was health. I mean, we were quarantined at home, not because of school, we were quarantined at home because we were concerned about our loved ones, including ourselves, about what's going to happen to the world right now. Now, things have definitely changed. I think we've had a lot of time to reflect and understand what our business model is. When we look at things like COVID, there's a lot more certainty around valid protection metrics and measurements around it. There's, talks of a vaccine now. There's a lot more hope and certainty for the future when we think about it. And I genuinely think tutoring is starting to ramp up again as well. What I would like to do, and we can either do this chat or we can just quickly, like for the next 2 to 3 minutes, I'd love to hear how COVID affected your guys' business, right? I think, and this is like, what I want to do is create a safe ground for sharing here. So like, obviously please hold everything that we talk about in confidence, but I think it's important that we have an understanding of like, hey, what was the impact? And did anybody see any sort of massive success in the March months? It could have just been the people who I was speaking to as well. So if you want to mute yourself or type in the chat, can you let us know how COVID affected your business?
I had to close my office. I had had my own office for 34 years. I do one-on-one tutoring for law school admission test, bar exam. Had to close my office, was very scared. Successfully have adapted to online. My business isn't up to the levels it was last year, but it's not gone at all. I'm still doing reasonably well.
And sorry, what's your name?
Edward Zurav, Easy Way Tutoring. I'm a one-man operation in New Jersey.
Great, thanks for sharing, Edward. That's great.
Sure.
Anybody else? Does anybody, and we can just keep going if all thoughts are concluded here as well. And then let me see if I got it. All right. Oh, we got chat too. Okay. Sally, yes. Yeah, sorry. We lost 50% of our business in April, picking up now again. Great. So it seems like we're all on sort of the same page here, right? With what happened with COVID. I don't think anybody necessarily saw a massive influx and rise with it. And I don't know if you guys experienced this as well, where there was sort of the myth that was emerging that tutoring was a booming industry back in April, and that people assumed my phones wouldn't stop ringing. I mean, I was dying for phone calls at that time, because just like you, Edward, I was thinking like, am I going to have to hang up the gloves? Yeah, and Molly just said, spring was bad and late summer is now, and it's much better now. That's, I think, what we're all starting to see. So let's talk about some like the major trends that are going to happen in tutoring. Now, there's two major trends, and the obvious one is online tutoring. Now, this is something I want to spend a little bit of time with, because I think it's important that we have a conversation about online tutoring and what does that really look like. Now, prior to COVID, there was a handful of really large online providers, especially based out of the United States, that their pivot wasn't so drastic or as challenging as perhaps ours, because if we weren't doing online tutoring prior, this is just like every teacher and every school board had to learn, we had to learn as well. So online tutoring, so I've been online tutoring for about 2014, I'd say, somewhere around there. Not fully online. I've always had a mixed model in my business. I want to sort of discuss the benefits of online tutoring. Now, online tutoring, there's the easy benefits, but what I want to do is show you guys some of or open up your mind to like the real benefits of online tutoring. Then we can talk about how we can make online tutoring a little bit better than what perhaps we're currently practicing. The biggest benefit of online tutoring is that there's no geographical boundaries. You can essentially get clients from anywhere across the country. And actually what I want to encourage you is to also think across the world. Like when you look at currency, you can benefit on this. Like if you think about going to the UK, because the pound versus the dollar, last time I checked, I think it was like 1.3, and roughly the same quantity of pounds would be to the quantity of dollars for tutoring that we see in the US. So it's interesting. So you can start to consider like, can you actually get clients from beyond your specific geographical domain? In addition to that, there's a tutor wage drop. When you're looking at online tutoring, hire tutors, genuinely, you don't have to give them as much perhaps income. And the reason for this is they don't have to travel. They don't have to travel to your office. They don't necessarily have to travel to somebody's household. We are marginally able to increase our margins by about 16% on the bottom line by a tutor wage drop, which was pretty substantial. So there's a massive benefit in that. In addition to that, this is pretty relevant in the US as well. Hiring a tutor that lives in, let's say, Manhattan versus a tutor that lives in Idaho, it's probably cheaper to go for the tutor in Idaho, but doesn't necessarily mean the quality of tutoring is any less. So you can actually pick and choose tutors where the average lifestyle is not, they don't need the same level of income to sustain. So meaning that you can probably get the same quality for a lesser rate. You also don't have cancellations, hurricane season, snow days, wherever you live in the US, you don't have to worry about it. You can close your office and not necessarily have to worry about rent or necessarily need the same size office. The best one that I found in this is that you can match students with the best tutor, not the closest best tutor or the best tutor within your office. And the benefit now versus prior to COVID is that people are getting used to online. I mean, the statistics haven't come out yet that I've seen, at least, of how many parents have enrolled in a mixed model or purely an online education, but it's without question higher than it's ever been in human history. So there's a lot of major benefits that when we look at tutoring as a whole, when we consider it from an online perspective. Now, the real question here, and I'd like to pose it to you guys, how do you make online tutoring successful when parents still want in person? So I ran a brief survey for this. And it's interesting because still, although online is being requested by parents, we're also seeing a request for in-person tutoring across the board. Even in really high COVID, concentration areas. So it's interesting that parents are saying like, listen, I've opted into online learning, but I need my kid an in-person tutor. So I'm curious, does anybody have any ideas of how you actually position this, or how do you talk about it, or how can you actually make it better? Yeah, go ahead, Edward.
I just sent out a chat to everyone. Before online, I just have them print the handouts. They'd be in front. We could go over it. Online now, it's the same way. That's something to think about, not just online tutoring. Use email. Send your students materials prior to the lesson. Have them print out, possibly review the materials prior to the lesson. You get a lot more done per unit time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're leveraging the technology is critical. Any other ideas around this?
It's so much more convenient for scheduling because you don't have the drive time. You've got kids with tight schedules, a lot of activities, and to squeeze an hour online is just so much easier than 2 hours, including drive time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, removing drive time is and being able to actually fit it in is where you can perhaps even bill out more hours. So there is benefits there as well. I missed out on some of the chat. Yeah, there's better math applications online. Yeah, great. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of some ideas here based on our experience with online tutoring. Right now, 97% of my clients are online. We have thousands of clients, just to give you guys a little perspective on it. And we do, the highest growing segment of my market is grade K to 3 right now. So it is with younger learners. And that always became some of the conversation with my team is thinking, listen, if they're that young, how do we actually make online better? So the question that I'd like to pose to you guys, because from the notion in the world right now is that in-home face-to-face tutoring or center-based face-to-face tutoring is better than online. Collectively, we can change the stigma. Because if we can actually make online better than face-to-face and genuinely put our efforts in doing so, where can we actually take our business, and how can we actually help students without increasing the risk of COVID, but also, in all honesty, really helping benefit our businesses heavily. So there's 4 major things I'm going to talk to you guys about. And sorry, I can't, my chat doesn't pop up easily here. Yeah, still trying to convince parents the most difficult hurdle. Rose, we can talk about that as well. And Edward said 100% of his pupils are online. Great. So there's a couple things that I'd like to talk to you guys about. The first one is called Come Alive Training. Now, this is something that we coined at TutorBrite a few years ago, and I'll walk you guys through it. And this was really, how do you make online better than in person? The second is better curriculum. We mentioned about bringing on the games. The third is getting the right CRM and leveraging the right technologies, because you can save yourself so much administration costs. And then how do you actually be better than Zoom? Because Zoom has, trust me, there's good functionality for Zoom, but there's other things that I think are hyper beneficial and better specifically for tutoring as well. So let me talk about Come Alive Training at first. So like I said, the biggest stigma right now is that, seeing each other face to face live in person is better than online. Now, what we did, we decided we got to change that. And the only way we can say it to tell parents like, hey, we're better online, but let's actually buy into this belief. And in addition to that, let's put our right actions forward. So the first thing that we did is started taking our highest level tutors, and we ran, we actually sat into their sessions online, because online is, like a Zoom meeting or whatever technology you're using. Typically you can do more than just 2 people in there. So we'd watch primarily how our best tutors interacted and how did they leverage the tools, the technology, how did they leverage communication on an online platform. In addition to that, then we started running virtual roundtables of different tutors at different age groups. So if you taught K to 3, we brought you into a roundtable discussion of 3 to 4 hours. You guys we allowed them to go back and forth and explain how they felt they could be a better online tutor. And then we created white papers around that. Then we did that for every specific age group. And when we got to high school, we did the math, the sciences, languages, etc. And what we learned is like really interesting is that online actually, by most of our by our best tutors' perspective, it is better. all of them said like 99% of the time, it actually can work out better unless you're dealing with the students maybe with special needs and needs a little bit more face-to-face attention. But things like, for example, that we realized is that you can do simple things like you could give virtual handshakes, you can do virtual when we got two students to commit to showing up 100%, removing all distractions on the line, and then we get them to do digital handshake like this with us. And it was like really interesting because their best tutors did this, and parents would see this in the background thinking, what are you doing? And they get excited about it thinking, oh wow, you got my child to commit. We institutionalize things like high fives as well. And now, like if you do a high five, well, you wouldn't do a high five probably in a session right now because of COVID, but even if you did it prior to COVID and it worked out and it seemed cool, you only did it so often. High fives became a thing of like, it's so awkward that it actually works. The awkwardness of it makes it like kids that are, 6 years old to kids that are 18-year-old, like they start to laugh at it. Other things that we started doing is secret handshakes. So for example, I got back into tutor. It was about a decade I took off from tutoring, and I got back into it this year to see, like, can we actually make this even significantly better? And for my students, we started doing secret handshakes together, and it was amazing because so we sign on with the session with the secret handshake, we end the session with the secret handshake, and on our first session, we decided like, hey, how are you going to show up and how am I going to show up? Let's set the intention and let's put a secret handshake to it, so if we know that we're showing up for that. When parents saw this, they were a little bit blown away, being like, wow, this is actually better than face-to-face. The fact that you are able to engage my child on it. So if you actually even think about the positioning to parents, a couple things. One is that if you talk about how your tutors are actually trained online to make it better than face-to-face, I highly recommend it. Bring in your best tutors. If you have 2 tutors, if you have 1 tutor, if you are the tutor, if you have 100 tutors, it doesn't matter. Bring in and have that conversation with the intention of how do we make online better. The second thing that I recommend is once you do that, create a training program around it. And training is really interesting. It doesn't have to be, super in depth. It could be like an orientation. So any new tutor that you hire or any current tutor that you do have, you can collectively put everybody sort of on the same page to have that conversation of, hey, how can we come alive across screen? And here are the staples in doing it. So how do you break the ice? Well, do a virtual handshake or high five or whatever it may be. Now, other benefits to parents, I'm just going to, if you're finding it difficult to position it, is shorter sessions, especially for younger learners. I mean, there was no tutor that we ever had on the roster that was willing to drive for a 30-minute session or a 15-minute session for that matter. But, if you're dealing with a student that is, 5, 6, 7 years old, we always, about 50% of the session was play, 50% of the session was actual work. So in this situation, you can actually shorten the sessions. If you were dealing with older students, they have tight schedules, you can shorten that session. So there's a massive benefit in, as we mentioned earlier, with the scheduling. In addition to that, online, our kids need to become better digital learners. And most of them are, there's no study done on this, so this is anecdotes, but a lot of kids are saying that, they prefer the face-to-face class. Well, it doesn't matter if you prefer it or not, the world is going to be changing. So getting parents on board saying, listen, we can get them to love learning online, and this is how we're going to do it. And then if your tutors are trained and they show up a certain way, I think it becomes a game changer. And when I walk you guys through some of the results, like our conversion on online, so we typically do an assessment on every student, I don't know, last month it was 100%. And since we started doing this, we were always above 95%. So that means anybody who've actually opted into our assessment became our client online, which was never the case before. So being able to come up with the constructs that you can personally believe that this will be better than face-to-face for your child. And in addition to that, your tutor, if you're struggling with tutor retention, which tends to be an industry issue, I think there's a great benefit in it because tutors typically feel a lot more involved and active in the decision-making, how they can benefit these students' lives. And also they prefer online, obviously, as well. Now, I'd say the next part is bring on the games. We mentioned earlier, there is so much better functionality on there. Things that we've done with our students are a lot of parents are looking for. So we have a rise of homeschooling happening, but you can start to integrate things like Khan Academy. Obviously, that's free for every tutoring company. You could access better worksheets from iExcel. And there's so many other out there. The biggest change that I see in education from a technology standpoint is gamified learning. There are so many platforms that you could share the screen, or you can mutually both connect on and actually create a curriculum that's digital and is inspiring and it's fun. I've done that. One of the best benefits as well is, let's say you're working on a problem and with a student, and for whatever reason you can't figure it out. You can quickly YouTube this or Google search it, and it's allowed on. Like, parents aren't frustrated that you had to do that the same way that they would if you pulled out your phone in the middle of a face-to-face session. So there's massive benefits on bringing on the games. Now, leverage technology. I can't stress this enough. If you don't, so depending how big your business is, you might want to consider a CRM. So that's a customer relationship management tool that helps you understand what's happening in the back end of your business. Now, things that are really important is that it gives you data. So it tells you, your basics of what your revenues are, what your profits are, perhaps what your conversion rate is. So if your phone rings, how likely are they supposed to becoming a client? It walks you through your scheduling. How many sessions do you have? It can tell you your busiest days. It can tell you when you have tutor vacancies as well. So when you are matching, there's an easy algorithm that's built in from a student tutor. It can give you a review of tutors. Typically, both of CRMs have a tutor review section where tutors would review after every session what worked, what didn't work. They could send these notes to the parents. They can opt in. It cuts your administration costs, depending on how big you are, substantially. Like, there's a massive benefit. I know Kevin has one with the Tutor Test Prep Association. Maybe Kevin, you can circulate that again for everybody that's on here. But if
Sure.
you don't have a CRM or a tool, I highly recommend getting one. That typically are not very expensive as well. It's $100 to $200 X per month. Sometimes more depending on the size of your business. We built our own at Tutor Bright. Just a lot of them didn't do what we needed to do specifically. But in it became a big game changer because it allowed us to really leverage the technology. Now, the next point with leveraging the technology, be better than Zoom. Depending on your age group, look for, I highly recommend looking for things that have an integrated whiteboard and where you can customize the whiteboard. So one of the things, like I said, about online tutoring is that there's a stigma that's not as good. The technologies that have been developed for online tutoring are meant for online tutoring and nothing else. That's the beauty of them. So when I talk to parents, or we talk to parents about it, their eyes open up, because their concept is, oh, my child doesn't like Zoom or Skype, or they're on FaceTime too much. It's like, no, hold on a second. The technology that we developed actually simulate face-to-face tutoring to a T, and actually is significantly better because we can upload documents onto the whiteboard. You can draw over. You don't need to bring in your pencil case with 20 different colored markers to highlight things. This is available on the whiteboard. And then we always say, like, listen, if you don't like it after the first session, you're more than welcome to leave. But kids really love it. And what we've trained our tutors to do is, like, let's say they're meeting for a student for the first time. It's their first session that they're ever going to have. We get them to decorate the whiteboard on the student's interest, because on that phone call or through assessment, we find out the student likes, I don't know, Spider-Man or basketball or whatever it is. And we put up pictures of it and say, welcome to the session, welcome to your first session, whatever the student's name is. And kids log on, they're like, wow, this is my session, right? There's an excitement that actually goes around with this. So I recommend considering things like with the whiteboard. There's so many different whiteboards out there right now too. Kevin, I think the technology that you have probably does have a whiteboard in it. I would think so. I'm not too sure. But
yeah, so our CRM it's separate from
the whiteboard.
our web delivery. We partner with GoBoard for the web delivery, which
Okay.
is an awesome platform.
Yeah.
But the CRM is just a hardcore CRM. It's
Yeah.
like LearnSpeed or
Yeah.
Tutor Cruncher or something.
Great. So yeah, so there's a lot of tutor-based CRMs. A lot of them have their own whiteboard built into it. If you guys want to know what Tutor Bright one looks like from our statistics, the reason why we built our own, and I don't want to deviate too much here, is like the statistics I want in my business, I couldn't get on any CRM. Like, for example, like a tutor utilization rate. I want to know how many vacant hours do we have on a month-by-month basis that we didn't use. I wanted to know better conversion statistics for the business. I wanted to understand profitability per city that I'm in, or per type of tutoring that I am, versus versus just the overall profitability, because this allowed me to manage my business. So on another day, I can show you guys a little bit of what those statistics look like and why they really became important for helping me grow my business. So this is what I also recommend. Now, we're all competition here, so don't do it to each other, but I mean, do it to the big guys. Feel free to do it to me. It's fine. Do a competitive analysis. I do this all the time. You know, the big guys in the US, we all know each other, which is funny. So it's, you know, like if I'm doing them, the objective isn't to outdo my competition. I just want to know what's going on. So when you're talking about your online pitch isn't very good, here's who. Varsity has a great online pitch. I recommend calling. They're a big tutoring company out of the US. If you're unfamiliar with them, they probably have the online. Out of all the companies I've called, I think they have a really good online pitch. I don't agree with everything that they say with it, but they have a really interesting way of positioning it to parents that really don't want online tutoring. Depending on who you speak to on the phone, you can understand, you know, where's your price? Because your price point, a lot of the more boutique agencies typically have a much higher price point than the larger scale organizations as well. So you can get that as an understanding. You can ask about the quality of tutor as well. Like, I mean, I've hired most of the larger organizations as well, because I want to see is the quality of tutor. I want to see their whiteboard, of things of this nature. And these things really became very valuable in the sense of sharing. Now people at these, like the executives at most of these companies, we all know each other. And unfortunately, as the bigger guys, we don't share a lot. That's why, listen, wherever you're at and you guys want more feedback, advice, let me know. I think that my real thought on the tutoring industry is that this is such a gigantic industry. Imagine, so my biggest issue is, for example, converting a family that doesn't want online to go online is because they had a really bad experience with another provider. That's terrible. That now the likelihood of me convincing you going online is so less likely, right? So if everybody did a great job, great. That's so much easier. And you know, I don't think we should take a lot of pride in thinking, you know, they left a competition for me, because that actually does damage overall to a very privately held industry where there's a lot of speculation and there's a lot of questions about equality. There's a lot of questions about things in the tutoring space. I think we can start to generalize a lot better if we all come together. But I do recommend doing competitive analysis in your area, because it will really help you, give you an idea of what are people saying, what are some good ideas around here, what are some positioning ways on the phone or during the assessment, what is the quality of tutors, things of this nature that are really going to help you propel your tutoring, your whole tutoring game. We do this about once a year. It was more often when I first started, but we do it about once a year. And it helped also allowed us to niche out and understand who we are and what do we really stand for that might be a little bit different than everybody else. And I'll get into that now. So when I did this, like, to be honest, some people had great pitches, some people didn't. Some people had a good technology, like a good whiteboard. Some people just used Zoom. Some people claimed their tutors were online ready. And some said, like, some gave me the woes of COVID and told me that, you know, like, it sucks, but this is all you're going to get. It was interesting even watching pricing change in the industry, like larger tutoring centers like Sylvan. There's I can't remember what they call you guys. And there's a brand that changes their name between the 3 countries that I'm in. So I'm remembering one of their names is called Oxford, but I know they're called a little bit different in the US. They dropped their prices. Yeah, Huntington. Yeah, Huntington. They all of them had some interesting, like, price variations because they were doing group sessions online. They usually do 3-to-1 student teacher ratio. But these are the things that it allows you to do. But one of the things I noticed that no one spoke about, and I highly recommend this, because this is, if somebody asks me where my biggest converting point is for parents, it is this. It's social emotional well-being for students. Is when we talk about things like their mental health, how does this, like a big question is, if a child's struggling with math, we'll ask the parent on the phone, well, how are they feeling about it? That's a big, it's an opener. It's a huge opener. We'll ask, does this affect their confidence or self-esteem? And every single time, yes. And then parents will open up and have conversations. Perhaps there's bullying. Perhaps, they're too hard on themselves and they're a high achiever. Perhaps whatever it is, there's a reason why you're getting a tutor beyond the academics. There's a specific outcome that you're trying to achieve that's emotional with your child. So getting to the root of that becomes really critical. And because no one did this, this was something that I've been this is the reason why I got into the space of tutoring is I genuinely think academics is a vehicle to instill characteristics of greatness in the next generation. But I think this is the biggest trend in tutoring, especially because of COVID too. So these are statistics prior to COVID, and they're quite alarming, and nobody ever speaks about it. So we're starting to see across the world a conversation about being comfortable with mental health and the overall conversations around it. So half of parents reported having concerns with their children's levels of anxiety and low self-esteem. That's a lot. That's 50% of parents. A third of parents that were surveyed, and there was, I don't know, tens of thousands of parents that were in this specific survey, and this was done in 2018, had a child miss school due to anxiety. And a quarter of these parents have taken off a day of work to deal with a child that has anxiety, right? 73% of teachers said that anxiety and low self-esteem is one of the largest pressing concerns in the classroom. And I hate saying this, but the second leading cause of death in Canada and the US and Australia is suicide within our youth. These are issues that nobody is talking about, and we kind of leave for the counselors. But when they did this study, the campaign actually behind it was for teachers as first responders, to get the understanding that you're going to be the first person to understand the symptoms of somebody not necessarily feeling well. So before a family perhaps calls a counselor or a therapist, they might ask for a tutor. That's very common because the first slip is academics. So when we see something like that, we have to understand that our importance as educators, as providers of supplemental education, should be more than just specific tutoring. So if you actually think about it, after COVID, is this going to change? Of course it's going to change. It's without question. I mean, my anxiety, my anxiety, I can't even tell you where it's stemming from half the time. Like I had to cancel watching news, and who I'm talking to is my life has flipped upside down. And that's me, and a person who's practicing a lot of self-development rituals in my own life. What is a kid that doesn't have any of these techniques? It's much different for them, right? So we have to start to think about, how is this mentally impacting them? I had a call from a really good friend of mine yesterday to tell me about his daughter, who's 14 years old, who has went mute. She just doesn't speak anymore. In the last 2 months, and he has no idea what he's going to do. And I mean, I've recommended some therapists for her, but I said, did this just happen out of nowhere? He said, no, since April, it started to decrease much more and more and more. So the thing is that, the parents that call in April are typically calling for that tutor. So we have to remember that. So one of the things that I want to recommend, to everybody in the space of tutoring is to be more than just a tutor, to understand that, we have a beautiful responsibility and obligation that is so much more than just specifically about getting that good grade. There's a myth that we've been told, get a good grade to get into a good college, so you get a good job, so you will eventually be happy. The truth is, if you aren't happy within the present moment of your life, you probably aren't going to be happy unless you can take into account that this is actually where you're supposed to be. So if you're a student that's feeling, this is where you're supposed to be right now, that's fine. There's no permanent state in life, yet there's this myth that we've been told that kids believe, if I'm a failure, I'm always a failure. I don't know if you guys have studied some of Carol's direct growth mindset, but the problem telling a kid that they're smart is that they never want to lose the permanence of being smart. So that they stop trying. So they dwindle down as well. So the question really becomes is that there is no permanent state of failure or success, or being smart or being stupid, or however you want to classify it. And it's just a progression, and education is just a progression. So we have to understand that as educators. Now, what I'm going to recommend is that you have to think about providing hope in this era of tutoring. And I'll walk you through some of the ways that we do it here at TutorBright and why it became really important. But before we go through, because a lot of, like, I mentor and coach other tutoring companies. And when I first was telling them about this, it was like, come on, Sonny, like there's no way that every family wants this. When I told you my conversion went up with online, I can't stress enough that my conversion on the phone went up. So not just when we do the assessment, is because we started to talk about this. When you get a parent or a family to open up about this, what an honor, right? It's like a true honor. And initially it's an odd way of, broaching the concept of education, but what it does, you get the underlying issues that are way beyond academics that are going to help you match the best student to the tutor and understand how you can show up for the student much differently than just getting them that A+ or whatever that specific goal is. So things that I'm going to go through very quickly with you guys, because I know we got about 10 minutes left, is 3 things that we started to include in our conversations with families and with their tutors. And we just ran a large tutor convention, a digital one. So if you have a large tutor group as well, I recommend doing a tutor convention. It's costs like nothing to do. Like when we used to do this before, we used to have to do it in every city that we're in, bring them all into like a Zoom meeting and you can do something great. Well, was to consistently have the conversation. So 3 things that I think about is mindfulness, gratitude, and affirmations. Now I'm going to go through all 3 of them with you very briefly. Now, when I think about mindfulness, so the number 1 form of punishment in our country is detention. Now, if you actually think about what detention is you take a student who's done something wrong and you put them in isolation. You want them to think about 3 things. You want them to think about what they did wrong, why they did it wrong, and how they'll never ever repeat it again, right? Detention in North America is a number 1 form of punishing a student. It's kind of crazy. Now, if you take the same student and they've, let's say, done something right, how do you reward them? You give them an A+, you give them a trophy, you let them play with their friends, a high five, whatever it may be. You give them some sort of external gratification. But the truth is, with reward, we don't give kids an opportunity to think about what they've done right. We don't treat reward like the way we treat punishment. So the question really becomes, why aren't we sitting down with our kids when they do something right and asking the exact same 3 questions? What did you do right? Why did you do it right? And how can you repeat this in your future? It will always anchor back to the characteristics. I studied harder, I worked harder, or I felt better, or I slept better, whatever it is. You'll start to let them come to the realization around it. And when people say like, yeah, I don't know if that, will work for every student. So there was this is a beautiful study done in 2017 in Baltimore in a really, really challenging inner city school that substituted meditation for detention. The year that they did it, they called this the mindful moment, where they took kids that were supposed to go into detention and taught them about emotional regulation, how to count their wins in life, not just their failures. In addition to that, to be aware of their anger, their happiness, and things of this nature. Suspension since that day. It is quite crazy to think about that benefit that they've had on those students. And we've actually introduced this to families in where we've run seminars for free over Zoom now for families to learn about emotional regulation with your child. And we can bring in a therapist to talk about this, or somebody on my team will talk about it, or I'll talk about it. And, if you have 5 parents, 20 parents, 1,000 parents, it doesn't matter. They register and you can help instill this. And because tutors are aware of this, they actually just hold our students accountable, saying like, listen, you seem a little off today. Let's talk about what made you off. I didn't sleep enough, or I'd have got a fight with my friend. But once you get them to regulate their emotions, it becomes really, really interesting. And once you get them to count their wins, oh my God, you start to see their self-esteem go up. So even if they got the math question wrong, but it's like, hey, look what you've done right. So that anchors their self-esteem to go and progress even forward. The second thing is gratitude. Now, very briefly, at a University of Pennsylvania, a study done by Dr. Martin Seligman, where he took 3 groups of people and he got them over a 10-week period to write down, each group to write down about different things. The first group to write down what they're grateful for. The second group to write down what irritated them. The third group to write down things that never changed their mood. The group that wrote down what they're grateful for had less visits to the doctors, showed higher levels of optimism and higher gratitude towards living, and just overall happiness has increased drastically. I can't remember the statistical percentage, but it was like through the roof. And he talks about like, the impact of gratitude, like writing one thank you letter to somebody that wasn't properly thanked in your life, the impact of it lasts longer than a month. So there's a lot of interesting things. What we did here, for example, we've started gifting things like the 5-minute journal to our kids, or we created our own, which is a gratitude journal, which I actually do with my students before we started a session. I said, hey, did you write in your journal? Can you go over it with me? And we go through it. The number 1 comment that their parents say is that they call us like the kid whisperer. They're like, I don't know what you've done to my kid, but you're getting them to like thank me in a weird, like they did, like, one of our 1-month exercise to write a thank you letter to mom or dad. And it's really interesting because like mom and dad now are bought in even more. And that wasn't the purpose. They're just more like, I can't believe you got my kid to do it. But it's an opening for it, right? So if you had a 12-year-old that was mute, and they're now writing you a thank you letter a month, 2 months later, and telling you what you mean to them, it builds a great family bond. And like, listen, they're going to have writing assignments or journal assignments anyways. Why not make it about something more optimistic or positive in their life? So we started to do this, and it genuinely, I would say it had one of the biggest impact on my business and the retention of our families. So so our biggest actually influx in the fall was what we call returning families. So people use their services in the last year that for whatever reason disenrolled now are coming back. It wasn't necessarily just new leads and new inquiries that were coming in. And a lot of them anchored into, I want you to keep working with my child on this. And listen, Tutor Bright's not branded like this. We're like the Varsity Tutors of Canada. We're like a generalized tutoring organization. We're not, specifically focused on these things. And then lastly, what we've done, and I'll wrap it up here, is we've started doing affirmations with our students as well. Not every student, but students that we found that when we'd ask them in the initial, we had a way of asking in our consult or our assessment with them of saying, like, what are some things that you really appreciate about yourself? And what we realized, most kids had nothing to say. It was really interesting. And then so we ran a study on this as well, where I went to the front of the classroom and there was a group of teens in there. There's about 25 of them, and they had 2 sheets of paper on them. I explained to them, you have 2 sheets of paper in front of you. I'm going to give you a question for each paper, and you're going to have 60 seconds for each question. The first question I asked them, I said, I just want you to be honest. I said, and this is not a test, I'm not going to take it up with you. So I went and I dictated the first question. I said, I want you to write down everything you dislike and everything you change about yourself when you look in the mirror. Kids start writing. By the end of it, they're emotional. We had to give them a 5-minute breather. Their pages were filled up. They come back into the room and I say, okay, question number 2. I want you to write down everything that you appreciate and you love about yourself when you look in the mirror. 87% of kids never started, and those who did finish within 18 seconds. So it gives you an idea that the self-defeating attitude that kids have on themselves is pretty high. Right? And even if they do feel good, there's ways of creating positive affirmations that make them feel better. And I'm not saying like the positive affirmation, I'm smart, but how about I'm capable? I'm capable of doing this, right? These become like the biggest change in the space of education. And like, very lastly here, because I know we're pretty much right out of time. Hey, Kevin, we made it time this time. Like we actually finished on time, which is kind of exciting. Is, as an educator, you may not be a formal teacher. You may be getting in the space of tutoring similar to me, where you're like, wow, I just fell in love with helping kids succeed. And you also may have realized that the business of tutoring is probably better than the business of teaching. Like it's a really high income territory if you can mold it well. The reality in this is that our importance as an educator is beyond anything I could ever imagine. Like the work that we get to do is changing lives. That is why we get up in the morning, right? Like at the end of the day. So COVID or not, how has it impacted your business? The 2 things the few things I want you to think about is, one is, if you think online has damaged your business, think about then how you make online better. Like that's a simple question, is how do you actually make it so much better for you, for your students, for your team, for your business, for your life? And once you anchor into that belief, it's so much easier in the positioning when you talk to parents. Like you say, like with conviction, like, trust me, it's better. And like, like when you just say that enough because you believe it with conviction, parents get to see it firsthand. And the second thing is, think about these little changes that you can do with your tutoring group to instill a better positive mental attitude for children, right? It could be anything where you could do gratitude lettering, you could do affirmations, you could do emotional regulation, you could bring in guest speakers, you can do a bunch of things across the whatever you find that's best suited for you, and perhaps what you do for yourself, I think makes a huge game changer for the space education and specifically for the space of tutoring. All right, I think I finished up here, right on time.
Right. Sonny, fist bump. Good job.
Thank you, man.
I learned that from you. I never thought of that. 38 years of tutoring. That's great. Great.
So, okay. Well, Sonny, thanks. So awesome perspective and really inspiring as well. We really have, well, you all really have a great deal of responsibility in working with these students. And it's just, wonderful to see that perspective. And it's a little sad to hear about some of the studies that were conducted, but anyways, Sonny, thank you. And I know you wanted to sort of go around the horn and see if people had questions.
Yeah, you know what? We could open up for questions and I understand like we might be out of time here. And if you guys have any questions or thoughts and want to discuss further, I'm more than happy to do so. I think, like I said, I think there's an amazingness in sharing in our industry. I like there's other industries that I've been more of an investor in. So like a consultant investor, and like they just share so much. Tutoring's a weird space, and Kevin, thank you for creating an association where people actually, you know, are encouraged to share. That's why I like to be active in these sorts of conversations, because there's a mutual level of learning back and forth. And I cannot stress enough, this industry is so big. If some like is so big, especially I think with the rise of COVID, I think there's going to be a massive, I think in the next 2 years, we're going to see it even grow much larger. But I think what it's going to do for us is help us all. So I think sharing becomes really, really, really important.
Yeah, you know, I totally agree. It's an odd industry, though. It's very, I think there are a lot of organizations are really protective, even paranoid to some degree. So yeah, there's really no reason to be. There's enough, more than enough to go around. So so that's exciting. So does anyone have any thoughts or questions about Sunny's presentation, or just the tutoring business in general?
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for a nice presentation. Thank you, Sonny.
Sure.
Funny, so I want to tell you, I was in on that conference in the summer, and I want to give you a hands-on and how your video completely changed my tutoring. You said that to get to know your students, you ask them the question, what do they want to be great at?
Yeah.
And so that, now what I do is I actually do a couple of questions. First, I start off kind of fun, because with the little kids, they're so into superheroes, right? So I ask them, if you could have a superpower, what would it be? And their eyes just light up, and there's just that immediate connection that I always get emotional about, which is so great. And then I'm like, all right, well, let's get down to earth. If you could be great at something, what would you do? And I'm just always amazed on a continual basis of the answers that they come up with. And then, of course, I share what I would like to be great with, and that even blows them away more, because, you know, this old woman wants to still be great at something, right? So I just want to let you know that your message has been very impactful in my business.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. Thank you. That means a lot. And that's beautiful. I love the fact that you're doing that with their kids. It's the difference between what do you want to be and what do you want to be great at. It changes the entire perspective for a student. Just, it's interesting how one word can be an inflection point for a student that young, and allow them. I love the superhero part too. It's especially right now, it's so timely with the rise of like the reemergence of superheroes in our world, and it's beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. Does anybody have any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, just a comment. Nope, go ahead.
I love the superhero question, and I really felt a lot of the affirmation stuff was fantastic. We try to ask questions about what student specific challenges are and how they feel about it. But it's one of the challenges with working with high school kids is that they're too cool. Like, they don't want to give. I have a 16-year-old who did his half day of Zoom classes today, and he had his hood up and he had his head to the side, so he wasn't quite on screen. He was definitely hanging out of the class, not engaged.
Yep. Yeah. I see that all the time.
Overcoming that aspect of I'm too cool for this.
So that's actually a really good point. So one of the students I started working with, his name is Parker, is too cool. And it's funny because when I first met him, I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Because he, if I ask him how his day is, it's good. Okay. Like, I'm like, what did you get up to? He's like, nothing. It's like the one word answer. Couple things that I knew here. One, and I explained to his parents, patience is going to be really critical. I have to show up with my level of enthusiasm every single time and let him open up. The second thing is I knew he liked video games. So, and I've never been a gamer, right? I wasn't when I was younger, and I'm definitely not anymore. And I found out his favorite video game was Super Smash Brothers. So I bought it. And it's like, listen, Parker, on an off day, the way I'm teaching you, you need to teach me. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, I want you to teach me how to play this. And I saw his eyes light up. I'm like, okay. And we actually, you know, over the summer started playing Super Smash Bros. I'm still not a gamer, but it was an investment that I had to make into him around it. And it's interesting because it's like I could indirectly, now he's opening up to me about why he doesn't like to get up early in the morning. He's opening up to me about his friends. I've been working with him since February. So it's, you know, it's enough time where I actually wanted to refund the parents their money. That was after the first month, I told my executive team, I was like, listen, I thought I was a good tutor. I'm not. But his mom said something really interesting to me right before I was going to offer that. She's just like, it's great that Parker even shows up to your sessions. So I guess in the past, he just stopped showing up, right? So like, you know, you got to count your victory. The fact that they are even in front of the screen and their screen's on is a victory. Like there's a lot of students that just, you know, that are in that mindset, like, get away from me. Like, I don't want another old person telling me how to live my life. So with Parker, like when he talks about his video games or I ask him about, you know, what's going on, I'll like research the newest video games coming out and be like, hey, give me a debrief. What's this one about? Tell me about it. And he'll like slowly open up and start to converse more and more. But now we converse, like yesterday's session, like we go over our time now, which is weird. Like I used to like struggle to fill like the minutes, like trying. It was pulling teeth. I felt embarrassed after every session. I felt defeated. I remember talking to my partner after, and she's like, 'cause she could hear me in my tutoring session. She's like, how do you feel? I'm like, I feel defeated. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna get through this kid. But I realized the way I was measuring my metric with him was wrong. My metric was to get him to do his work. No, my metric was to get him to show up. Now I can get him to do his work to some degree. Like there's a different level of, there's a different level now with it, and it takes time. Be patient with it. Just keep showing up without any disappointment. Be like, cool, oh, you're tired today? Cool, me too. Yeah, I get it. But you know what? I got work to do. That's my job. I don't want to get fired. Like, so do you mind if we get a little bit done? He's like, yeah, I understand that. Okay, like, what's the least we can do today? Probably we're going to have to get your homework done. And he's like, oh, I don't agree to that. And we like go to like, okay, we agree on a third of his homework. And it's interesting. Then I'll explain to his parents, being like, listen, this is going to take time. But now it's really weird looking at it, him like, he got up this whole week of school, his first week back, he got up every day at 9 a.m., which like we were like singing his praises. Now that's not normal, right? But we were, because he's progressively getting better. So it's allow yourself to be patient with him and give yourself the credit. The fact that he turned on his Zoom is a big deal, like, or his video, whatever it is. A lot of kids don't. They're just like, no, I don't want to. Like we see that as a, you know, big insecurity in it. So I would say like, be patient. And
That's a requirement.
Yeah. Well, that's a good requirement. That's a good requirement. And the fact that, you know, he's not pushing, and the fact that he turned it on, showed up. Yeah. And even if he's nonverbal, I think there's like the fact that you're consistently showing up, people open up over a period of time. Like they just do. It takes time. Everything takes time. And some students are really verbose, and like, you can't shut them up in a beautiful way. Like they want to keep talking, want to give you everything, like what's going on in their life. And then there's the other end that you know, that the individuals that you're speaking about is where I think patience is critical. And then be able to articulate that patience to the parent, so they understand that the fact that you're just showing up is really important. It reminds me of that movie Good Will Hunting, where Matt Damon is just kind of sitting in Robin Williams' office and nothing's happening. And he's just, you know, and he's just being patient with it. Very similarly, it's kind of like, it's like the way you want to kind of, I like to position it like, wow, what a fun project. This is going to take some time, and let the parent know that. And I'm going to assume that most of us have been in the space of tutoring for some time. So to even leverage that experience, being like, listen, it's going to take some time, you know, and kids kind of like laugh at it. Like one of my kids that was kind of like that, like always made like, you know, snarky jokes. I said, listen, like those jokes, and some of them were sometimes inappropriate. Like, listen, what we're going to do at the end of the session, we're going to have a dad joke competition. Last 5 minutes, you had to bring your best dad joke, and I'm going to bring my best dad joke. And then we're going to take a board in it, and the loser owes the person $20 at the end of the month. I'm always going to lose, right? Because I'm always going to give him the victory. So you just can't wait to get that $20 gift card or whatever that I send to him. But it's changed our dynamic though. Like, so he doesn't joke during the session anymore. He saves his dad joke for that. He's like, oh, you will not believe the joke that I found. I'm like, okay, we'll save it for the end. So there's things that you can do and leverage around it once you start to build, you know, your commitment and patience with it. But I would stress patience is the most important thing in articulating that to the family.
You have to be a good listener to be a good tutor. You really have to connect with the person. In order to connect, you have to hear, not just listen to them, but hear them. Of course, my problem is that I have people who they don't want to talk for 10 minutes out of a 2-hour session. They want to get 125 minutes in 2 hours, and they want it all to be on the material. I'm lucky. I have focused students. They're older.
Yeah. I think with older students, you know, that's one of the benefits, that they're motivated, and they're probably the ones paying for it too. It may not be mom and dad. You know, when mom and dad are paying for it, kids can deviate quite easily. But that's why when you take the role of the mentor and not necessarily the tutor, and explain that, you know, through your acquisition of the client, like through their process and their touch points with you, I think it allows for that, you know, like, listen, like, I know you want the A+ or whatever that goal is. Let's just work on them showing up right now. I think that becomes really important. and setting those expectations. Most parents are understanding with it. And the crazy thing is, you just don't know what's going on in the kid's mind. They might actually be like, you're a great tutor. They just don't know how to say it to you as well. That's a pretty common thing that I see with especially students that don't 100% show up to the sessions, that they're just like, they're happy that you're showing up 100%. But that's good, guys. So a couple things, Kevin, as we're wrapping up here, you said that I sit on the advisory board with Kevin. If you guys want any other advice, guidance, you could reach out via that email. I'd be more than happy to participate. If you guys want to look at formal coaching, I'd be more than happy to discuss that as well. If you guys want to do other workshops, I'd be more than happy to do that. And we could keep having these sorts of collective conversations, especially as this industry is emerging. If there's a second lockdown and schools close again, we're all going to have to pivot again and consider, what does this really mean? The advocacy around tutoring is really, really important. The more we promote it as a collective, the more it becomes accepted as a necessity for a lot of parents. In addition to it, lastly, there's a couple things happening in the US that I was recently made familiar with. If you're considering your tutoring, growing your tutoring business, one is that there's a lot of government grants that the Secretary of Education will be releasing for tutoring for social low income areas. So that's something to take in consideration. I know that's happening for sure. And it's going to be done through different people who are going to distribute it. I don't know who yet, but I know that it's happening just based on COVID. The second thing is, if you're thinking of scaling and growing your business, one of the hottest times right now for franchising is education, just through my experience in it. And we used to franchise, so that's another story for another day, of the goods and bads, the uglies around it. And then there's a lot of venture capital and private equity getting financed into tutoring businesses right now. So there's a lot of interesting other things to consider if you're considering growing your business as well, and which are obviously all major talking points. Great.
Good time to be a tutor.
Yeah, it's a good time to be a tutor, guys. It's fun. It was a pleasure being with everybody today. Thank you all for showing up. I really enjoyed it. It's great to see your faces, and I look forward to hopefully being able to communicate with you guys a lot more in detail in the future. And Kevin, once again, thank you for hosting and putting this on for us.
Oh, our pleasure, and thank you, Sonny. So it usually takes me a few days to wrap up the video, but once I have the video trimmed up a little bit, I will forward it to you all. So that's it. If you need to get in touch with either Sonny or I, please write teach@testprepprofessionals.com, and have a great week.